We've already touched briefly on the role of assessment and the need of learners to self-assess, and briefly on the role of exams and how they may impact our approach to self-regulated learning.
I think one of the main things that we can do as teachers when we're working with our students to bring in some kind of assessment to this, especially with regards to the framework in our area of self-assessment, is to start small, with having students complete a task, maybe within the classroom, within that time frame of a single session, and then having them keep a log of basically what they're doing as they go through, they're completing that task. It could be something as simple as a listening task. You know, when you first found out that you were going to listen to this lecture, for example, what did you do? Did you do anything to prepare? What was going through your mind? When the lecturer first started speaking, how did you react? What was going on? It's this kind of idea of just really trying to break down the process of whatever the task is and getting them to think through and to be metacognitively aware. So metacognition being thinking about thinking. So thinking about what was going on in your mind while you were engaging in that task or listening to that lecture, for example. Starting with something small within the class, but having that documented in some kind of detail that the learner keeps track of themselves and then can share with a peer, can discuss with a peer, can submit to the teacher at the end of the class, and maybe the teacher chooses some very detailed examples to discuss in the next session, for example. This can be quite powerful and can be manageable in terms of something that takes place within the classroom that's guided by the teacher, but that the students are leading themselves in terms of monitoring their own processes. And then in terms of assessing that, I think it's not necessarily about whether the students chose the best strategies or whether they went through every step, perfectly the first time or anything like that, but it's about the depth of their reflection, and it's about whether or not they're being critical of their own learning and whether or not they're aware of what they're doing. A lot of times just being able to write down very specifically what was the process like when you completed that challenging task can be very effective for making learners aware, or both of what they're doing and what they're not doing, especially if they're sharing with a peer and they're becoming aware of how someone else approached a very similar task. That can be quite informative, and teachers can assess, as I said previously, the depth of that reflection and whether or not they've engaged in that.
And also whether they've made changes as a result of their reflection.
Of course.
Right, because you don't want to necessarily, as you said, punish someone for getting it wrong the first time. I'd rather have a learner who is able to reflect on what they did, recognize that there were changes that could be made, and then gets it right a second or a third time, rather than somebody who gets it right, but perhaps by chance the first time.
And that's a kind of a gentle way of doing it then, isn't it? Sort of pointing it out, and then they don't feel so bad about it. And I also think that what you were saying is just really useful for speaking and writing in particular, because the students often struggle with those two skills. And it also helps the less confident students, because they can look at the process and think, well, actually, I did quite a few things in the process well, even if the end result maybe wasn't so good, but the process showed good intentions, and that gives them a bit more confidence next time.
Yeah, I think writing is a really interesting one, especially like writing a short essay, for example, because it's something concrete. It's this artifact that the learner can then look at, and as they're sort of putting together their reflection, or as they're putting together their log or series of actions that they used in order to complete it. So I think starting with something short like that within the classroom, even within a single session, and then slowly branching out to maybe 2 sessions or a week, or it becomes a task they complete on their own that they have to then document what they were doing. Maybe it's linked to extensive reading or listening that they're doing outside of the normal sort of day-to-day kind of classroom activities. But it's starting with that single session and then branching out to something that could be a final term assignment. So not only do you submit the assignment at the end, maybe it's this big essay you've been working on, but you also submit your log, your log of how you went about completing that. So the process and the product are then balanced between.
Yeah, and also, as you said, you start off small and then you expand, or you expect more from your students in terms of the depth of their reflection, but also the range of aspects of their learning experience that they can reflect on. And you might use the framework explicitly and ask your learners maybe towards the end of a semester or a course to reflect on whether they feel that they're better able now to identify their needs, and maybe give an example of that, whether they have learned to set more practical, pragmatic, meaningful goals, whether they're able to monitor their progress and what new strategies that they've developed, for example. So you can actually, over time, make learners actively aware of the different aspects of self-regulated learning, because in the long term, that's what you want them to be able to do independently without any of your support, right?
Yeah, and in doing that, in making it a dialogue, making it an interaction with students, emphasizing that they're not being graded, assessed, or judged.
Thanks for joining us. If you want to learn more about this topic, you can listen to the full podcast on Apple Music, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and more. Just follow the link in the description. See you soon.